Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. I'm Suman, your host for today. We seem to be in the midst of a news cycle that has a few breaking news every day. However, through the budget session and after, a policy topic that has stuck is the Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar Ajivika Mission. That's quite a mouthful, but in short, the VBG Ramji Act now. There has been considerable political mobilization around this. Karnataka saw a sit-in last week with people from all over the state coming to express their opposition to the current state of affairs, as in the VBG Ramji. A few weeks ago, I had an episode with M.R. Sharan also on this topic, where we discussed the impact VBG Ramji would have on federalism, on social movements, and other such things. We have been reading about this further, and my colleague Ameya pointed to me to a particularly thought-provoking LinkedIn article by Libby Johnson on rights and institutional capacity. He has an article in the India Development Review, which is titled, Can VBG Ramji Deliver What MNREGA Couldn't? So who better to have on this episode than the two of them here? So to discuss this and broader issues of employment guarantees and state capacity, I have with me both of them, Libby and Ameya. So this makes it extra special. So by way of short introductions, Libby is the executive director of Gram Vikas, an organization that partners with rural communities to ensure dignified livelihoods for all. He has seen the functioning of MNREGA from ground up, and I'm sure his insights will give us a lot of food for thought. I also have with me Ameya Naik. He's a research fellow at the ODI's Development and Public Finance Program and co-leads the Digital Public Finance Hub. He's also an associate fellow at the Takshashila and teaches policy analysis at our policy school. Once again, welcome both.
Thank you. My name is Libby Johnson. I currently live and work in Odisha with an organization called Gram Vikas that's been working with rural communities in the state for the last 48 years. Gram Vikas's focus has been on community development, quality of life of rural communities, and we've attempted to do this to improve living conditions, the quality of life through various interventions over the last nearly 5 decades. And focus has primarily been on what works best to solve a problem that a large number of communities have at a point in time. Gram Vikas has been a technology provider, resource provider, but most of all, we've played the role of an enabler, getting people to look at their problems and try and address them, solve them themselves. And I have been in this position now for nearly 8 years. The reason why I take to the Employment Guarantee Program is one, early days of my education in Pune. Maharashtra is actually the home of the Employment Guarantee scheme. And I happened to study at the Gokhale Institute, which was set up by people who had a key role to play in the EGS in Maharashtra. And I also had a long stint with Kudumbashree, which is a state poverty eradication mission of government of Kerala, where the state had used MNREGA as a very strong social security scheme, less of an employment guarantee, but using employment guarantee as social security. And when I came back to work in Odisha in 2017, it was after 12 years that I came back to Odisha, I found MNREGA in fairly bad situation. And, what could have been a lifeline for people, particularly in places where distress migration is the norm, seasonal distress migration is the norm, people who are refusing to work in MNREGA sites. So that's kind of where my long interest in employment guarantee come. But I cannot claim to be an expert in this. My role has been more of an participant observer, but very interested participant observer. And failure of NREGA has also affected Gram Vikas's work, because a large chunk of our work on water and natural resources require large funding, which is not available through other sources, but has to be in convergence with government schemes. And NREGS is probably the only scheme that speaks about natural resource management related investments at such a large scale. So failure of NREGS also means a lot of our work gets affected. So consider me a participant observer, but with a great interest.
Thank you and welcome. Welcome to the show. Ameya,
Thank
over to you.
Thanks, Suman. So, quick intro. As Suman said, I'm a research fellow with ODI Global, which is a think tank based out of London that works on development policy, economics, and international development broadly defined. I've been teaching public policy at Takshashila since 2019. For the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years of my career, I've been working on civic technology and GovTech broadly defined. So how can governments use technology to drive more effective governance, more effective service delivery? A lot of that has been more in urban local governments rather than rural, which is where the employment guarantee schemes have played out for the most part. But I like how Libby framed it. I'm an interested observer or an interested participant observer of how the government of India has sought to bring technology into many of its welfare, social security, citizen-facing schemes. I think over to Libby really to talk about, you said you had the vantage point from Maharashtra, from Kerala, and from Odisha. So what does employment guarantee schemes actually look like?
When it was introduced, it was remarkable. And I refer to that in what I wrote for the idea. It was a new contract. It was a new compact between the state and the citizen, where we are actually looking at a new form of welfare governance, a new form of the state taking care of people who needed to be taken care of at some point in their lives, without resorting to charity. And you take any other scheme that takes care of people with vulnerabilities, there is a definite amount of charity. And there are a huge amount of selection errors because somebody has to be selected. NREGS by design was meant to be demand-based, somebody who wanted work. And this I saw across. As part of my work with Kudumbashree, one of the things that we were doing was to help several other state governments roll out the National Rural Livelihood Mission with the convergence between panchayats and women's institutions as a core component. And everywhere, when we started, whether it was Assam, Jharkhand, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, each one of these states, when we started speaking at the panchayat level, at the village level, with both the local governments and the women in self-help groups and their federations, NREGS had a very, very strong identity that women had not so much as a source of income, but as a backup. But this I've seen in Kerala. Kerala's numbers, which I've also celebrated in the article, I don't think able-bodied people in Kerala work so much in NREGS. Impossible in a state where the unskilled labor wage rate in the market is 600, 700 rupees, that anybody would come and work for 320 rupees. Not even 320 at those times. It was below 300. So the NREGS paid about 40% of the then prevailing, or even now prevailing, market wage rate. So somebody had to be really desperate to be working in the NREGS side. Mm-hmm. Now, what also happened was what happens with a lot of the development interventions in this country. Various forms of corruption did creep in, but I don't think that by itself is reason to thumb down NREGS and its effectiveness. But to me, employment guarantee, not so much increasing incomes for households, but for those who did not have at any point in time the confidence that they would gain wages, they could earn wages from a regular market operation. This was a place where they could find reasonably dignified source of income. And to me, that dignity component, that I did not go as a beggar, I did not go as a beneficiary, is the contract between the state and the citizen that NREGS pioneered. And today, that is what I see we will lose mostly. That's for later, of course.
Yeah, so it started off that way, right? And what did you see actually happening in terms of dilution of rights? What happened that, this contract started to fray at the edges?
The contract was a product of desire and intent. It was not necessarily built on an assessment of capabilities to deliver, extant capabilities to deliver. But the state in this country, whether at the union level or at the state level, has delivered things without pre-existing capabilities. UPI or any of those large interventions that eventually required large number of citizens and some form of administrative mechanism to line up to it has delivered it. So I don't believe the lack of capacity is sufficient as an argument to say why NREGA has failed. Kerala obviously had huge advantages. One, decentralization was a norm. So development administration was heavily decentralized. Funds, functionaries, functions were all there at the Gram Panchayat level. Gram Panchayats were population-wise and size-wise very viable units. Unlike many other parts of the country where they are not viable units, you can't have a Gram Panchayat administration for a population of 2,000 or 3,000 people. It's probably, a ward in Kerala, the Gram Panchayat ward in Kerala is about 2,000 population. So, there's also viability of that. So Kerala had huge advantages. But I also saw states like Karnataka, places in Karnataka where, despite panchayats being smaller, huge administrative will to do it. So the Kaikamitras in Karnataka or the ADS mates in Kerala are remarkable innovations that state governments were able to bring in. So while that was the case, I do not think state governments in most places imagined this redefinition of the contract between state and the citizen, because we are all said and done a feudal democracy. And patronage is what we thrive on. And I think the failure of NREGA was in trying to replace patronage-based feudal democracy with more equal participatory democratic systems. And
that's an ideal that one would want to go towards, right? To replace the feudal-based.
This is not a podcast on political theory, but I think there is a lot more work needed for an employment guarantee scheme like NREGA to work in the way it is designed to work. Otherwise, I would think exceptions become the norm, and thumbing down administrative procedures and everything that we've referred to in the article also becomes a norm. It's much easier because ultimately, even that's also a fact, a functionary at the Gram Panchayat level or at the Panchayat Samiti level in Odisha, if they want to do this right as per the NREGA's law, not the NREGA law and the NREGA scheme. And that's a distinction I want to make. The law and the scheme actually became different very early itself.
Yeah, could you just elaborate on that?
So the act is what the parliament passed. That's the law.
Yeah.
But what is implemented on the ground is not MGNREGA, it's MGNREGS. And the scheme came with guidelines drafted in Delhi, imagining India to be one unitary country with, I've had the opportunity to be part of some of these national level program drafting processes for guidelines. And the Delhi-centric view, Gram Panchayat is community. But the moment you go to a Gram Panchayat, the Sarpanch is not community. Sarpanch is elite. Sarpanch is the governor, is government. The community is everybody else. So, guidelines of schemes have this inherent weakness, and NREGA, the scheme itself suffered from that. It was up to state governments to make use of that. But the moment you have a scheme like that, there is also audit and there is also accountability of that kind. So innovation and risk is not something that happens within the government system. And participation, demand responsive work planning, etc., eventually became elements of innovation and risk for implementers. Whereas getting a list passed, putting down to the Panchayat Gram Sabha a list of work to be taken up in the coming year, the normal administrative thing became very easy because you could account for it. You could, it was easier.
Yeah.
So what the act said and what the scheme eventually made people do were very different. And one reason why I don't really, the article doesn't really cry about NREGA going away is because I didn't see NREGA in action. I saw NREGS in action. And it will be very, very, very controversial if I go on like this, but I will lose friends in the sector, for instance. but that's my personal point, that the act and the scheme were two different entities.
Let me try to dig into that a bit also for the benefit of listeners, because I think the three of us have a mental model of what the scheme was supposed to look like, was supposed to work like. But you've emphasized that administrative capacity varies. You've emphasized that the nature of the relationship between the sarpanch or the gram panchayat and the rest of the community varies. And you started saying, and this is what I want you to build on, you started saying, if a gram panchayat or panchayat samiti worker wants to implement it according to the intent, this is what they have to do. So I'd like you to build on that to sort of say, in the best case, how would it be done? And then what are some of the ways it diverged from that? The scheme started not doing that.
See, a question I ask myself is, and that's the question I ask you, Ameya, is the NREGA Act justiciable for a citizen? Is it similar to Article 19 of the Constitution of India? I mean, you have to find a very, very smart lawyer to represent you in the Supreme Court to make that statement, right? So you calling it a right to work, to me, is not
an overstatement.
It is an overstatement because it's not easily justiciable. I can't go to a lower court and seek protection to my right to work, can I? That's the whole point. And that is why I said the act and the scheme are different, because the scheme becomes the mechanism for the state to deliver certain social development or social justice goals. The act is way more than that.
And what you're saying is you have seen that scheme be used well in some places, that it has been used to deliver, if not the right to work, as you put it, then some sort of social security backup. So how has that worked? Like when someone did that well, what did they do?
So for instance, allowing older people to come and work in the work sites, till this tamasha of digital e-muster rolls and, biometric attendance became the norm. I've seen work sites in Kerala where the worker community got together and 5 people, older people working less, 15 better able people working more for the 5 people. So there was a lot of community action even at work sites. Because 5 older people with lesser physical ability was on the site didn't mean work didn't get completed. Work for 20 people got done and 20 people got paid for 20 people's work. But it's that 15 people did 18 people's work and 5 people did 2 people's work. Now, that is the beauty of the scheme. That's the beauty of the right to work. I mean, and that's why I say it is a greater social security option than income generation option. It's to me, it's less of a cash, income guarantee than it is a social security guarantee. Now, how did Kerala do that? Or in Karnataka also, I've seen that happen because the people believe the lever of control was somewhere near them, if not with them. So if somebody comes and says, why are those 5 people sitting by the side? The remaining 15 would say, why do you bother? We are doing the work. And it was not administrative that 5 people were added to the group of 15 for convenience. It was the 15 people and the 5 people coming together and saying, we are one group. So it was demand-based. It was generated from the community. It was being done by the community. The moment I know you're interested in the digital part of that, the moment you took away control from the paper to an app to a screen, people lost control over it.
Okay.
Somebody had to come and take biometrics, somebody had to be there. So, I know of cases where older people would go back home earlier and still be accounted for because somebody else did their work. But the moment you regiment it and you make it very clearly siloed, like this has to happen now and this has to happen now. Even a well-meaning co-worker will not want to take risks. She will only want to do her work and go home. She will not want to become community-oriented there, right? I mean, because there are too many risks and she has to be there at that time to provide her biometrics. Otherwise, her attendance is not marked. So you messed it up completely through all these administrative and unfortunately uninnovative innovations around digital. they took away the control from the people. And that is why I don't have a problem with NREGs going, because people anyway did not have control. So if there is no control envisaged under VBG Ramji, then what has changed?
Okay.
So we'll come back on the tech question, but Suman, if you wanted to comment on any of what we've covered so far.
Yeah, you spoke about demand suppression and actual demand. Like, again, are we saying that administratively getting work when you demanded it became difficult, or was the demand registration itself blocked out that, you could show less demand on paper?
That's what eventually happened, including the one news item from the economic survey that I referred to. When the government says there has been no demand, it is true.
Okay.
There's no demand recorded. But does it mean there was no demand that was there? I mean, it was not on paper. Did people not want work? That's not true. So the Gram Sabha could not record demand for work. Labor budgets, which was the original tool where you actually do it in the Gram Sabha, identify all the works that you want, all the people that want work, and then build it up to a district level plan and whatever state level plan, etc. That process stopped long ago.
Okay.
So we don't know if there is work for demand or there is not. We don't know. When I say this, because I know there is demand for work on the ground in Odisha, in villages that we're working with. And I know that there is no way citizens can place that demand before their government.
Okay. So which is why we are seeing a suppression. And that is being seen as, okay, we don't need demand, therefore we can cut out parts of the entire scheme itself. And probably allocations to that will also, we have seen it coming down, right? So we can move on in terms of, again, you were talking about justiciable rights, positive rights, negative rights, right? So how can we look at VBG Ramji? So should we just stop looking at it as a right, or should we just look at it as a scheme? I mean, what could be different?
It is a scheme. I mean, MNREGA was a scheme. The VBG Ramji scheme will be a scheme. It will most likely have more or less the same contours and conditions as NREGA. So I don't see anything remarkably changing over the next year or two. Okay. Maybe eventually things will change, and the government has this very strong ability to change as it is required. It's slower. So I'm not pessimistic about the government not becoming responsive to citizen demands. That it will, that's for sure. But in terms of rural employment, I don't think NREGA's VBG Ramji kind of schemes can create livelihood enabling infrastructure that will support the last standing citizen of India. It's not. I mean, that is social security. And VBG Ramji, I don't think will have a strong social security element to it. It is going to be a very transactional, market-oriented work arrangement. You come, you put your biometric, you start working, you provide a certain output, you sign off and you go. So it will be employment. Okay. I am not going to sit in judgment saying if employment is not necessary. It is necessary. So will this scheme not be accepted? I think the scheme will be accepted because there is need for employment, but it is not a replacement for the right to employment guarantee.
And would anything change for the local government functionary in your understanding under VBG Ramji, or no, they will carry on doing more or less what they've done?
So I honestly think VBG Ramji is MNREGA's 2021 in a new name, except 100 to 125, but there is a 60-day blackout window. I have no understanding why. Because there is, in Odisha today, if you ask me which are the 60 days in which agriculture takes place, I have no idea. The farmer has no idea. We are a rain-fed state, right? And sowing season in the last 7 years that I've seen has extended anywhere from, typically it's around 10th of July. But there have been years when the sowing started on 20th of August. So, okay. You have a 40-day variation today in terms of when the agriculture season starts because of advent of monsoon delays. I don't know where this argument that NREGA has disrupted agriculture labor market, I really don't see. I mean, at least in Odisha, in parts of Assam that I know intimately, Jharkhand that I know intimately, I don't think it's real. In fact, there is more reason why there should be public employment schemes if monsoon has been delayed.
Yeah.
As relief measures. That's what originally GS in Maharashtra was, right? So it's too early to say what BBG Ramji will be like, but those are elements that I wish it would bring back in terms of, even if it's not demand-based, but very highly localized, context-responsive things like if monsoon is delayed, then would the state, because it cannot even be state-based, it may be block-wise. So would the 60-day window be allowed to be changed block-wise, for instance, or at least district-wise? So those are some of the things that we don't know about the new scheme. So some of those, if it works, probably substantial, not much difference on ground in terms of what it has been in the last, say, 7-8 years, or even I would think in terms of NREGA, probably the last 20 years.
So if we are talking about, again, planning for public works within each thing, the VB Ramji says that there would be a centralized plan, and from there the other plans will flow. How do you think that's going? Again, that seems to be a lot of centralization, at least to me. Is that a good way to go? I mean, how does it play out on the ground?
I still don't have full understanding of how VBG Ramji will play out. It does talk about village-based planning being the primary tool, and but I am not very hopeful around it. When you're dealing with, the question is this: is the state's primary responsibility in this particular scheme of things Antyodaya or Sarvodaya? If it's Sarvodaya, then it makes sense to have a great element of centralization, because Sarvodaya cannot work with very context. I mean, you can have less contextual, but not
wide reaching or wide delivery. Yeah.
But if Antyodaya is the approach, and if you want to respond to the last person's need first, then centralization is not going to work. I'll stop at that for now, because it's also unclear to me how it will.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So let me circle back then on the digital part. My understanding from looking at how the government of India has brought digitization into many of its schemes. I mean, the most famous would probably be public distribution, right? Like the right to food and public distribution system. But it's not stopped there. It is today part of health. It is part of childcare. It is part of employment or livelihoods. And the general understanding has been that this will help us target quote unquote leakages. This will help us make sure that people who are not eligible are not able to get the benefits of this particular program or this particular scheme. And a lot of the, to the theme that you were saying about, has anybody thought about the capabilities that are necessary for this? A lot of the burden of making that work, for better or for worse, has fallen on more or less the frontline employee. The ASHA worker, the Anganwadi worker, the site supervisor, so on and so forth. I guess from your point of view, looking at how this has played out in NREGS, is there anywhere it has worked as designed, or what has the impact been?
There are conflicting issues. Conflict for me when I look at it. When you say there are leakages, I agree there are leakages, and I completely agree that leakages have to be stopped. But we also need to stop for a moment, pause for a moment, and see what made these leakages worse.
Sure.
What worsened the leakage situation. That's one. I have, when it came to PDS, there obviously are various forms of arguments there, but having seen in the southern states universal PDS and then targeted PDS coming in because the union government insisted on that, the cost of corruption, cost of leakages in universal PDS was probably much less than what it is in targeted PDS. And, you create problems and then you put new solutions over that. You solve for symptoms and not the root cause, and then you create new problems out of treating the symptom. That, at least in the rural development space, use of digital technologies, I think, have been attempts at treating symptoms which have created new fundamental problems. Exclusion by virtue of biometrics is huge in PDS. Now, is there a way for the state to have imagined that exclusions will happen, and there has to be ways to address those exclusions? So 60-year-old woman whose thumb won't work. I mean, anyway, her ration shop will not have a iris reading device anyway in that remote part. So where did we dump this principle of Antyodaya? And if you seriously wanted to take care of your last citizen, what would you do within this? And that's my question. I'm not saying that digital is bad or digital is... digital has obviously led to exclusion, but it's not. You cannot blame the technology for that. You blame the use of the wrong technology for that. So biometric is one. And this whole... in NREGS, what I saw is, and this I lived through, I was on work sites, I was in meetings in the villages. Earlier, before all the e-muster roll and the PFMS and then ABPS came, the Sarpanch was accountable. However corrupt that person was, people could actually walk up to that person's home and ask what happened to the muster roll. Where is the payment? The moment you digitize it, that fellow escaped. Corruption didn't come down. Leakages have not come down. Anywhere I've seen this. The volume of leakages have remained the same, but accountability moved completely away from Sarpanch. Sarpanch was not answerable to people in his or her panchayats because the argument, what was his argument?
Computer said no.
It is on the app. You please go ask the BDO. Now, which citizen has the time and wherewithal to go and sit in front of the BDO's office and ask that question? I mean, because the Panchayat Executive Officer also in Odisha works for 2 or 3 panchayats and most often operates out of in many cases operates out of the block office more often than in the Gram Panchayat office. So it essentially meant that the Sarpanch could now do corruption without fear of the citizens. This is what digital did. And I'm generalizing it because I've seen this across. Because earlier, you had to answer because the paper was in your office. You are the custodian of that register or piece of paper. The Sarpanch and the GRS now can get away because they say, oh, it's not with us. It's become a password-based accountability. So whoever has a password to the login account is accountable. The Sarpanch is not. So this is dangerous. This eventually what will happen is, one, it will thumb down decentralization because people will say that, oh, what use is the Gram Panchayat for us now? Right? And see, I would have been very happy if corruption had reduced. That it is not.
Instead, one of the angles you point to in your article is that actually people got entirely removed from eligibility, that especially with relation to payments, people got simply marked as ineligible.
Yeah, in various forms. No, there is no way. GRS says I have marked your attendance, or later it became biometric. I have no way to verify if my, or if somebody is playing games with my attendance at some point. Because on a sheet of paper, when I do my thumb impression or somebody puts a tick there, it's a living document for me right in front of me. I can relate to that. So most likely for me, I would be very happy if VVG Ramji moves to a AI-based image scanner where the attendance register is manual. People sign on it or people tick on it or whatever, and then image of that is uploaded to the VVG Ramji software and that is read. So entry at least, data entry at least should be visible to the person whose data is being entered. And that would probably work. And at least people will have something to refer to. If the compiled muster roll comes back and that sheet comes back with me absent, that I can at least show them, or I can keep a copy of the image in my phone and keep it for future and say that, see, it's not being tampered with.
Yeah, I think also we should take into consideration digital access to and awareness, education around that, as also, people's comfort with the entire digital system, right? That
not sufficient. because you still don't have the password.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, given what we have right now, your article talks of a few things to make BBG Ramji better. Could you just explain to our listeners a little more in detail, just so that everybody gets a summary of what we want to do with BBG Ramji?
So one of the things the scheme says is it will do village level planning. It will bring in, while it will have a lot more centralized schematic inputs to do. Our hope is that there are two participatory plan processes that already happen. One is called the Village Prosperity and Resilience Plan, which the SHGs do. And the other is the formal Gram Panchayat Development Plan.
GPDP, yeah.
GPDP, yeah. Both of this still have great potential because there is some form of a demand that is placed in the Gram Sabha that is recorded theoretically. So one possibility is that the BBG Ramji scheme planning draws from the GPDP VPRP bill. Now, this requires huge amount of state capacity to do this. But one of the things NRLM did was to create fairly strong women's institutional system across many states, which many of them have not, at that time, also not really taken the MNREGA route. Kerala was an exception. Parts of Assam, they did. But Bihar also, they did not, despite having a very strong women's organization network. So there are possibilities for us to do that. That is one of the things that we are saying, that make the work planning more citizen-centric, because there are existing mechanisms that can be improved upon, used. That's one. Second, we are saying from a very, if you look at climate change, the needs for resilience and adaptation building action, there has to be a lot more focus on natural resources. And there are no schemes today in the country which invests in natural resources.
Can you give some examples? Like say local time?
Watershed development, rainwater harvesting, farm ponds. So what happens now is MNREGA is also, if you look at Odisha's work achievement in the last few years, farm ponds appear everywhere. Large amount of work. But then, nature is such a thing that you cannot go and do something somewhere and say that I have contributed to adaptation or resilience. I mean, you need to do it scientifically. There's a topography to manage, there's geohydrology to understand, there's a slope to understand. So this would require substantial investment from the state in terms of capacities locally. But, we are a country that had done watershed development across this country 25, 30 years ago. So it's not that we cannot do. There's also the forest department, which is a player we seldom speak about, because in many parts of this country, especially the mountain and hilly parts, the upper catchments of watersheds, which require management owned by the forest department. In many states, forest department actually has a share of MNREGA's funding and they do work on their own. So the ask is essentially to see if state can put a bit more focus on natural resources and take it forward from a carbon market point of view, having a more scientific approach to natural resource management, including reforestation, will definitely actually, one, in terms of ecological sustainability and resilience, but also allow for more number of communities to take advantage of new financing mechanisms like carbon credit. So one can actually imagine that happening. And, like I said, when it comes to states' performance, one can never be pessimistic. One has to be optimistic, obviously not over-optimistic, but there is no end to asking. And one of the reasons why a lot of my friends who are protesting against NREGA's withdrawal, I think it's done and dusted. But when they protest and when they ask for, NREGA to be brought back, I actually don't think it is futile, because with our democracy, asking continuously is probably the only way to bring any change. So people have to ask. I mean, I'm not asking for that at this stage. I'm saying, okay, immediate, if NREGA is replaced by BBG Ramji, can we make BBG Ramji processes a lot more scientific in terms of natural resources and a lot more responsive in terms of community demands?
Okay, cool. Thank you. Final thoughts, Ameya? you have something to add? Or, I mean, I just had one thing on employment guarantees and the entire direct benefits transfer. If
I'll save my comments for the end. I'll make one book suggestion, because people who've studied the GCP with me know that I'm always making reading suggestions. So I'll save that for the end. But go ahead, Suman.
Yeah, so this comes at the background of quite a bit of political upheaval, right? Even in terms of, I think this started just before Bihar elections and, that entire conversation. I think the bill came out after the Bihar elections itself. Okay, so if increasingly governments are resorting to direct cash transfers, if they are choosing to spend their resources on schemes like, which require them to just do direct transfers, where do you look at employment guarantee itself as a concept? How do you look at it?
One is, I would not take expediency to be the solution to any problem. And cash transfers, the way they are designed today, is more political expediency than logic. That's my view, one. Second, I think employment guarantee of the NREGA type came from our experiences in the late 90s and thereon. 30 years later, we are talking about an entirely different generation of rural poor, if I may use that word, of very different aspirations, very different inclinations. So employment guarantee that is, for instance, heavily manual labor based, which require people to dig, is not something that the current younger generation of people, when they come to that requirement and position, are going to accept. So we may need to look at employment guarantee in a different form altogether. My last point would be, what is employment guarantee? Employment guarantee is not money. It is a relief of some form. We desire that our investment in relief contributes to development by creating assets or by creating longer term human development. If that is the case, shouldn't we be clear about whether we are looking at benefit for all or benefit for a few? And how can we, NREGA tried to do that benefit of the few through self-selection without having administrative political expediency coming in the way. So I don't think we have sufficient evidence, at least from where I stand. I don't see sufficient evidence to say yes or no to employment guarantee yet. But I know for sure that it will be a very different form of employment guarantee. And will DBT take care of that? DBT might take care of the needs of 80% of the population for 80% of the time. That would still leave a substantial part of the weaker sections of our population out of it, because cash will not guarantee them food security.
Sure.
And food security is not just grain. So PDS is only the cereals. There's every other part of food security there. So I have my doubts about DBT being beneficial for the last few people.
Yeah, and if you're talking about inclusion and dignity, I think we have to
of course.
Employment guarantee, definitely. Ameya, over to you.
Thanks, Suman, and thank you so much, Libby. I think a couple of things that you've highlighted will stay with me. One is, as Suman was saying as well, that there is an element of dignity here, as distinct from charity, that we ignore or we underestimate at our own peril, because it is the design of a scheme from the top down without really realizing what the experience of someone who is on the ground participating in it is like. And I'm actually phrasing that in the most gentle way I can. I could be saying it much more harshly. The other thing that you've highlighted is the difference between Sarvodaya and Antyodaya. Or are you doing this for the vast majority, or are you doing this for the poorest of the poor, the weakest of the weak? And that those need different approaches. So thank you for both of those observations. I did promise a book suggestion, which came to me when you were talking about how demand is registered and what is the reality on the ground. Nayanika Mathur has a book called Paper Tiger, which people may enjoy reading. She went to do fieldwork on the NREGA in Uttarakhand and ended up looking at how the state deals with tiger and leopard attacks, because those happened while she was there. But she makes this beautiful distinction between reality, or what she calls asli zindagi, and then what is recorded, which she calls kagzi, or paper record or paper reality. And in many ways, I think what you've shown us today is that the two are different, and that a lot of emphasis was being put on the paper record, sometimes at the cost of the asliyat, or the reality on the ground. So that would be my last thoughts.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you, Libby. Thank you, Ameya, for joining me on this episode of All Things Policy. We hope to continue this conversation. I'm sure there will be lots more talk as we see how this goes on the ground. And I hope to have both of you at some point to discuss how it's going with Vibiji Ramji. So thanks so much, and we'll speak again sometime.
Thank you, and a pleasure talking to you both.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Suman. Thank you, Libby.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.